into another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by thehoosier.com, the Hoosier on 3. John Alden with you as always, back for, things are starting to finally feel a little bit normal once again. Second week in a row, we're back doing the show, and I'm glad to have you along for the ride. Also, happy day after Mother's Day to all the moms out there, including my wife. First time being a mom for Mother's Day, and I'm glad that she seemed to enjoy her day and really the weekend in general. And I'm very, as I've said before, proud to call her my wife and the mother to my daughter. And things have just been so very enjoyable throughout this first month with our new baby. So, again, appreciate all the nice comments that have come through about the newborn baby, and just appreciate each and every one of you. I do want to mention one particular comment that I saw come through. This is from Grasscutter 1963. He or she says, "Congrats to you, John, and your lovely wife on the birth of your daughter. She was born on my daughter's birthday. So happy." I was gonna say happy birthday, but that was a month ago. But that's kind of cool right there. So thank you, Grasscutter 1963, for that comment. And speaking of grass cutting, man, like it is that time of year, right? I do take pride in cutting my own lawn. I know some people, pay somebody to cut their grass. Sometimes I wish that I did that. I never would, not because it's a waste of money, but just because I believe if you know how to do something, do it yourself, right? It could save you a pretty penny, but it is definitely grass cutting season, and it is my yard is not far off from needing to be cut once again. So again, shout out to Grasscutter 1963 for that nice friendly reminder, just with your name right there. Real quick before we get into all of the ordeals of today, remember to subscribe to thehoosier.com. I'm going to go and pull up this little reader here. If you're not a member of the Hoosier on 3 community just yet, you can join right now for just $1 for your first month. And then after that, you'll get 50% off the rest of the year. I don't believe there's any other college athletics site with that sort of deal out there right now. So as many of you probably know too, On3 has quickly become one of the premier recruiting database sites, and it's not just for recruiting. That's one of the things that's used for. So if you want to keep up with everything going on with potential prospects for Indiana basketball and football, that's something that you definitely want to have in your back pocket, especially as we move through the rest of the off season. You're going to want to keep up with everything going on with the latest from those who are committing to both Indiana football and basketball. I know we've kind of been following along with the transfer portal for basketball, but as things kind of become normal and you're not rebuilding a roster from scratch anymore, this type of stuff will become all that more important to follow along with if it is something that you care about, which I'm assuming if you're watching this show, then of course you care about that sort of thing, right? So be sure to do that, check it out, and also subscribe to the YouTube channel. That, of course, is free. And then hit that notifications bell to be notified anytime we put up a brand new episode of this. Of course, we also have Talking About the Hoosiers. We're going to talk with Drew Rosenberg today, a little bit about Indiana basketball, but primarily about what's been going on with the NBA playoffs. So I know we don't always talk a ton of NBA, but right now it kind of feels like the NBA playoffs are really the thing going on when it comes to sports. I know you got the NHL playoffs as well, but it feels like in our neck of the woods, of course, basketball is always going to take precedent. And you got MLB going on as well. And for those who do not know this about me, Major League Baseball, I just find it so difficult to get into. And I don't know. It's not that I don't like baseball, because I enjoy going to a baseball game every now and again. I used to really love watching college baseball back when I was younger. But there's always been something about MLB that has just been very difficult for me to pick up. I think part of it is that there's seemingly a million games in the regular season. I know it's like 180 something. I know it's not really a million, but I think for what it's all, I've always said this about the NBA regular season as well, just because I know it's not quite the same amount of games as MLB, but I think one reason we love football so much is because it feels like there's so much on the line each and every game because there's such a small amount of games in a season that it makes it feel like every game matters so much more. And you can say the same thing for college basketball too, and really any college sport, because the seasons are so much shorter, than their professional counterparts. But that's kind of my biggest, I hate to call it beef, but like whenever I commit to watching something or following along with the team, I like to watch it from the beginning all the way to the end. And I cannot do that with MLB. I can't. And I know I'm honestly, even the biggest MLB fans, I bet, can't do that. But either way, if you're somebody who enjoys Major League Baseball, enjoy baseball season, because this is one of your times to shine as we head into the late spring and into the summer. I mean, once we get through the NBA playoffs, and you can throw NHL playoffs in there as well, I mean, it's that and MLS if you're into Major League Soccer. And we don't have an MLS team in where I live. We do have a USL team with Louisville City, and I know many of you up at Indy, you follow Indy 11 as well. I mean, I know this is in touch with Indiana sports, by the way, but I have to say that it's always Lou City before Indy 11. I can't pretend to be an Indy 11 fan when I've been around. I mean, I've been around Louisville City FC since its inception down here where I live in the Kentuckiana area. But either way, that's kind of where we're at right now in the sports calendar. And really, before you know it, just a few months from now, we're going to be talking college football as we get ready for Big Ten football media days. I mean, what about 9-10 weeks from now is when all that stuff gets underway. And we're also going to have media days down in Las Vegas, if I remember correctly. So that's going to be an interesting change of venue for the Big Ten this year. And of course, it makes sense given you have 4 teams out west and you don't want to always make them draw the short straw and have to, travel all the way out to Indianapolis or Chicago or wherever Big Ten media days typically is. So that'll be a nice change of pace. I'm curious how that will affect, the times in which they'll broadcast the different press conferences for each coach. But we'll definitely talk more about that as we get closer and closer to that time. But let's get into it, shall we? Today's going to be kind of a grab bag sort of show. I've got a lot of things on here that some things are things I wasn't able to get to last week. Some things are also a couple of things that have happened within the last few days that I want to talk about. And we'll kind of be jumping all over the place today. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have Drew Rosenberg on as well to kind of talk more deeply about what's been going on with the Pacers and really the NBA playoffs in general. So we'll look forward to having that conversation later on in the show. But I do want to start with some Indiana football stuff. And it's not specifically Indiana football, but it involves Indiana football. And this is something that was released, I believe, about 5 or 6 days ago. And this is Joel Klatt's post-spring top 25 for the year 2025. And as many of you know, Joel Klatt, probably one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite analyst for college football. And some may think that's because he does tend to lean more in favor of the Big Ten football programs as opposed to the usual SEC hype men that are on ESPN. So I'll always appreciate a little bit of Joel Klatt on my timeline. But he's got Indiana slated at number 21 for his in his pre or post spring top 25. And I think that's pretty fair when you look at some of the teams that are also around them. You've got Ole Miss at 20, Auburn at 22, Big Ten upcoming foe this year, specifically Iowa at number 23. You've also got who else is in this top 25 that Indiana will play this year. Look at this one. And this is a game that Indiana will play in week 4 this year. You got number 10, Illinois. That's something that I don't think you will see reflected in the preseason AP poll because, of course, Illinois, very similar to Indiana, never gets the preseason respect that they probably deserve when they're likely going to have a good season. So that doesn't mean that Joel Klatt is way off base, but he's somebody who, of course, follows along with teams like Illinois a lot closer than most of the other, again, SEC-centric analysts that you find on the four-letter network. Maybe I'm wrong, though. Maybe you will see Illinois in, preseason top 10. And I know that the top 25 that you see come out is not given to us by ESPN. That's more so when we get to the college football playoff rankings, because you got the coaches poll and the AP poll that we'll follow along with before we get to the CFP rankings later on in the season. And then I guess since we're looking at the top 10 at this point, below Illinois, you got Alabama at number 9, Georgia number 8, LSU number 7, Notre Dame number 6, Clemson at 5, Oregon at 4, Ohio State at 3, number 2 is Texas, and rounding out your top 25 at number 1 is Penn State. I was going to say I find that a little shocking, and I think everybody does to an extent, just because Penn State, although they've always kind of been in that upper echelon in the last several years, they've never really, they haven't won a championship. They've always kind of been in the conversation, but they've not really gotten it done. But the big thing with Penn State this year is that they are returning so many of their important pieces that got them to a college football playoff and nearly got them to a championship game, especially the most important ones like Drew Aller and the like. I think many people are expecting them to kind of pick up right where they left off and potentially be, again, of course, the perceived favorite by Joel Klatt right now. So, and that's something that I think maybe you will potentially see reflected in the top 25. Maybe not, though. I would imagine I wouldn't see Penn State ranked lower than 4 when you get the real top 25 out there. But yeah, there you go. That's what Joel Klatt has as his preseason top 25. I do think Indiana being at number 21 is pretty fair. And part of why they are still getting respect heading into 2025 outside of the success from last year is because they do have a lot of, I'm going to get to this tweet that I retweeted earlier. They do have a lot of returning players that are considered to be top 10 in their position heading into the 2025 season. 2 on offense, 2 on defense. This is according to Pro Football Focus. The 2 on offense, you got Elijah Surratt, of course, wide receiver, formerly a transfer from James Madison, who had a hell of a season last year for Indiana. He is currently listed as the number 4 wide receiver heading into 2025. And then you have the number 8 offensive tackle in Carter Smith. And as we all know, Indiana's offensive line last year, a big reason as to why they were able to be so successful, really in all facets of their offensive identity, because all of the running backs that Indiana rotated through last year with Tyson Lawton and I was going to say Kalon Black. He wasn't really in the rotation. He'll be in the heavy rotation this year. For some reason, I'm forgetting some of the names that will no longer be on the roster from last year. I know Lawton was one of the biggest that Indiana had. But I feel like we're going to continue to see a 3-man rotation in the running back room. Either way, don't want to stun lock myself on that right now because I'm forgetting what names are. But either way, on the defensive side, you got the number 8 edge rusher in Mikhail Kamara. I think many people would argue that he may be one of the best defensive linemen that Indiana football's ever had. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But Mikhail Kamara, one of the most consistent defensive linemen to just get into the other team's backfield and find the quarterback. And so having somebody like that on your defense, of course, very important. And then D'Angelo Pons, the number 3 corner, listed in Pro Football Focus, of course, had some key interceptions, had the pick 6 against Washington last year that ended up really setting the tone for how that game was going to play out. So, of course, he's very important to have back. And not even mentioned on this list is Aiden Fisher, of course, star linebacker for Indiana last year. I don't know where he might be listed if he's not in the top 10. But in my opinion, he's kind of your anchor for the entire defense. He's what many people this is kind of a cliche at this point, many people would call him the quarterback of your defense. And if Indiana were to not have Aiden Fisher, I'd be a lot more worried about what the defense might look like heading into this upcoming fall. But I think Indiana, once again, has all the pieces necessary to, have another wonderful season. Will it turn into another college football playoff appearance? I mean, I don't want to say it's impossible because we've already seen they can do it once, but it's something that to be able to replicate that year in and year out, unless you're one of the programs like Ohio State or Notre Dame or those who are expected to always be at the top level of college football, I don't think you should expect them to always be in the playoff. But I think one thing you can do with Indiana is expect them to be in that conversation each and every year. So and that is the reality of what Indiana football is now, this day and age, with Kurt Signetti at the helm of the program. And I think a lot of people, I know we mentioned cautious optimism just because we're always worried about that letdown after a really good season, but I think there's enough evidence on the table and a lot of returning production. There's no reason we should expect Indiana to take a big step backward in 2025. But I say big step because technically, if they were to go 9-3 or 10-2, that's technically a step backward because you were 11-1 last year. So, anyway, that's kind of where we're at when it comes to the football side of things. And before I do have some basketball things I want to mention. I do want to get a couple of non-IU related, or really just one non-IU related football thing out there. But Michigan coach Sharon Moore has decided to suspend himself in a self-imposed punishment, which is, of course, no matter what level of college football or basketball, it's always been kind of laughable when teams or coaches self-impose a ban. I haven't done a ton of digging as to why Sharon Moore is doing this, but one thing that I find very strange about this self-imposed ban is that he's chosen to sit out as the coach for the third and fourth opponents of the year, which are Central Michigan and Nebraska. And I looked at Michigan's 2025 schedule because I was curious as to why he would choose to like those games specifically. Because normally, like remember when Jim Harbaugh suspended himself? I think he suspended himself for the first 4 games of the season, and they were just a bunch of nobody opponents. And it was, again, just stupid. But when you look at Michigan's schedule this year, weeks 1-4, we'll just use that same comparison for what Jim Harbaugh did. In weeks 1 and 2, which Sharon Moore will be coaching for, you got New Mexico at home and Oklahoma on the road. And then, of course, 3 and 4, Central Michigan at home, Nebraska on the road in your first Big Ten matchup. I thought I had a good reason. This is the best thing I could come up with as to why Sharon Moore would choose those 2 weeks. And that's because you probably don't want to be absent for your first game, no matter who your opponent is. Like New Mexico is not somebody Michigan should have a lot of trouble with, but I'm sure you still want to be around for that opening game, I would imagine. And then, of course, you don't want to be absent for a crucial marquee non-conference matchup at Oklahoma. But then you got Nebraska on the road in week 4. It's your first Big Ten opponent, and you're not playing them at the Big House. So I don't know if maybe they chose that to kind of offset why they didn't choose Oklahoma, So I guess maybe what they could have done is gone for weeks 1 and week 2, but then you risk having a lackluster start to the season. Maybe Sharon Moore's line of thinking was, you know what, let's just get these first 2 games under our belt. Then we'll be feeling good going into weeks 3 and 4. They won't need me as necessarily as they may have in the first couple of weeks. And then we could pick back up where we left things off against Wisconsin in week 5. I don't know. But it'd be interesting to see if they had any trouble with Nebraska on the road, because Nebraska is going to be looking to take a step forward this year with Matt Rule in his 3rd season, if I'm not mistaken. Nebraska made a bowl game finally for the first time in a while, and I think if I'm not mistaken, won that bowl game. They were in the Pinstripe Bowl, if they even still call it that, up in New York, where they play in a baseball stadium. Yeah, I think they defeated Boston College, if I remember right. But they'll be looking to take a step forward as Nebraska tries to continue to march back to being the football power that they once were. So that will probably be a big matchup for both teams. So it'll be interesting to see if, I don't know if Michigan will get any more suspensions from Sharon Moore. I don't know what they are doing. I've never understood the self-imposed ban. Do they just assume it's going to be worse so they don't self-impose? And maybe by self-imposing, then the NCAA won't do anything. But what has the NCAA ever been able to do anyway? They seem to have no power this day and age. Players can basically do whatever the hell they want, whenever the hell they want, because there's no transfer rules. There are rules, quote unquote, but nobody follows them. And so it's just very, I've always found it interesting, the self-imposed bans. And I'm curious to see how it'll affect Michigan down the road. You've heard me say before, I think Sharon Moore's kind of a bum as a head coach. He did kind of get Michigan rolling to, I mean, of course they beat eventual national champion Ohio State to end the season on the road, and they gave Indiana a run for their money in the game before that. So they kind of figured things out in the final few games. But if Sharon Moore doesn't take a decent enough leap forward in year 2, I mean, if it's similar to last year, I don't know that he'd be fired. I don't know. Maybe he would be. Michigan, the brand for Michigan football, I mean, you just won a national championship a couple of years ago. And to already be taking steps back into, I don't want to say irrelevancy, but to not being at the top of college football, Michigan football won't stand for that for very long. And so I do think Sharon Moore he needs to do himself a favor and get them to, probably a 9-win season at least to keep fans feeling like they're moving back to where they want to be. But if they take a step backward, I don't know how much mercy fans will have on somebody like that, being not far removed from a national championship head coach and Jim Harbaugh. Sharon Moore is kind of just like hey, let's just give it to Sharon Moore. He was on the staff. He'll do fine. Yeah, I don't know how long that'll last for him. But we'll see. So that's another thing I wanted to hit on. I wanted to switch over to basketball. Now, this is something I actually just stumbled upon right before I got rolling with the show here. And this is, so we all know Mike Woodson, quote with quotations, retired from coaching whenever he left Indiana at the end of this year. But we now know he is set to become an assistant coach with the Sacramento Kings heading into next year. And of course, back in the NBA, where he probably feels like it's more of his natural habitat when it comes to coaching. He spent pretty much his entire career outside of Indiana coaching in the NBA, whether it be as an assistant or a head coach. So although it was called a retirement for Indiana, like that was, we now know for a fact that was strictly a PR way, or it was the politically correct way of kind of just moving him out, because you didn't want to fire an alumni who had become a head coach and he didn't quite ruin the program, even though some people made it seem like he was not doing his job fully. And I'm not going to sit here and act like he was a perfect head coach, because he wasn't. But he clearly is way more fitted to be a coach, again, whether it be a head coach or an assistant at the NBA, than he is at the college level. They simply use that word retirement just to kind of make it a little more humane when they were moving on from him and then now bringing in the Darren DeVries regime at Indiana. So wishing him all the best. He put this statement out on Twitter on May 9th. He said, "Coming home to lead Indiana men's basketball was an honor. It was a great opportunity to represent the program that helped shape my college career, and I'm deeply grateful for the full circle journey back to Indiana. Thank you to the fans for your support through the ups and downs, my players, my dedicated coaching staff, team managers, the IU professors who guided our young men off the court, the medical staff and trainers who kept us healthy, and the strength coaches who challenged us daily. To my wife, Terry, and our daughters, Mariah and Alexis, your love and support have made this journey worthwhile. To my family and friends, thank you for giving me strength to continue building my vision while staying grounded. Coming back to my alma mater to coach brought me fulfillment. I'm proud to watch the young men I've coached transition into gentlemen on and off the court. I want them to know how proud I am of them. Our journeys will continue, and I'll always be here for them." And really, that statement right there just goes to show, everyone always said the biggest strength for Mike Woodson while he was at Indiana was his connection with his players, even though his teams were not always the most, I don't want to say disciplined on the floor, but they weren't always, it wasn't always a well-oiled machine. We can say that. There's a lot of inconsistency throughout his tenure at Indiana, but they did always the relationship between Woodson and the players was always a very strong bond, as it should be with any coach-player relationship. And so that's probably the biggest strength he had as a head coach while he was here at Indiana, being able to relate to the players as somebody who was formerly with the IU program. So shout out to Mike Woodson one more time, and I'm sure he will do very well in his new role as an assistant with the Sacramento Kings. What else? Just quick mention here, Terry Morin, the Indiana women's coach. She was named the U19 FIBA head coach. I haven't done enough, or I haven't done too much digging as to what all that all entails. But shout out to her. I think she, if I remember right, I think she did this in a different capacity or a different role with the FIBA, one of the FIBA teams in previous years. But nonetheless, a good mark for her as she's become one of the, if not the most winning head coach in the history of Indiana women's basketball. And I'm sure she won't be slowing down anytime soon. I have always found it interesting, though, that she is a Purdue alum doing all of these wonderful things for Indiana women's basketball, as opposed to where she played herself at Purdue. But nonetheless, Indiana fans very happy to have her on board, I'm sure, for hopefully a very, very long time, keeping Indiana women's basketball in the thick of things, as they aren't quite at that elite level yet, but they are, of course, much better than they've ever been. And I don't think they haven't taken any real dips since she's been Indiana's head coach. It was a slow climb at first, but once they reached the echelon that they've been at now for some time, they've been very consistent in the last several years, even when they've lost crucial pieces like Mackenzie Holmes and Grace Berger, those types. So, of course, we'll see what happens as she moves into yet another promising season this upcoming fall. What else we got here on the basketball front? We got Assembly Ball, the TBT team. Last year, Assembly Ball made their debut, and it was a decent debut. Won a game in the TBT and then lost their second one. I can't remember the name. I know they defeated the Butler team, or it might have been the Purdue team. Was it the Purdue team? I think they defeated the Purdue team and then lost in the second round. Either way, it's not that big of a deal, the way in which it happened, but they're getting set for their second round or their second iteration of Assembly Ball this upcoming July. And there's already been two former standouts that have announced they'll be joining the team. Of course, Yogi Ferrell will be back for his second straight appearance as Assembly Ball's point guard, but he got a new face from last year that we didn't see last year. And that is James Blackman Jr. will be joining Assembly Ball. What a 1-2 punch at guard for Assembly Ball. Two really prolific scorers. I haven't seen James Blackman play in quite some time, but of course he was a very good one and done player for Indiana while he was with the Hoosiers under Tom Crean. So it'll be interesting to see who else ends up joining this roster. Will we see guys like Miller Kopp return, Christian Watford? Will this be an all Indiana team? Or there's usually a few guys that don't have anything to do with the program, but it'll probably be a majority Indiana team, as I would imagine. I'm looking forward to seeing who ends up joining. And there's also one other thing I want to mention when it comes to the TBT. And I think this has already been solidified. There was a home court advantage challenge, and whoever between each of the seven, I guess there will be an eighth host, but there were seven at the time. Between the seven hosts, they were having a contest to see who would have home court all the way to the finals, I believe, or might be the semifinals. But I think Louisville ended up being the highest selling. It was the first region to sell 4,000 tickets or more than 4,000 tickets or something like that. Gets to host for the longest, and Louisville ended up winning that. You got the Louisville region, the Lexington region, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Syracuse, West Virginia, and Wichita. I do think there is another one, but they only have 7 listed on here for now. Maybe they haven't selected what the 8th one will be. But I'm looking forward to seeing how things will shape up for Assembly Ball. I'd like to see them make a deep run. In my neck of the woods, Louisville had a hell of a run in the TBT, culminating in a matchup with Kentucky, the Kentucky alum that ended up, I don't think it sold out, but it was a hell of a crowd at Freedom Hall between the Louisville and Kentucky alum. And that game got chippy. You had Willie Cauley-Stein getting into it with, was it Montrezl Harrell? Did Louisville have Montrezl Harrell playing for? I can't remember all of the nonsense that took place, but who says you can't have fun, competitive basketball in the middle of the summer? Definitely the TBT would beg to differ on that front. And then finally, and then we'll get into our segment with Drew Rosenberg. This is something I had in the back pocket. I was going to potentially mention it during last week's show, but I didn't feel like it would fit naturally into that show as well as I wanted it to. But this is, and I don't really know how long I'm going to spend talking about this, but I do want to mention it because it's something I've always kind of had had thoughts on, I guess I should say, before I get into it, but I've never really wanted to go down this path. So we'll see how long I go down it before I turn around. Maybe I won't turn around. Who knows? But Rob Reinhart, he made this announcement. Again, this happened almost 10 days ago, or I guess by the time this episode comes out, 10 days ago. So this may be considered old news, but I do think it is still topical, and that's why I want to mention it. But Rob Reinhart, he put this up on Twitter, and I'm just going to read what it says. He said, "I am announcing that I have filed an official complaint against Jeff Goodman with both the Associated Press and National Sports Media Association." Of course, many of you know, myself included, Jeff Goodman's probably one of the most connected college basketball reporters, analysts, whatever you want to call him. He's one of the most well-connected guys out there. But he's always kind of seemed like he's kind of had an underlying agenda, if you will. Maybe that's not the best way to phrase it, but I'll continue with Rob Reinhart's announcement. So Mr. Goodman blocked me on X for challenging one of his reports. I am deeply saddened to see his indifference towards free speech and journalistic integrity. I am not the first journalist or critic who has been blocked by Mr. Goodman and will not be the last. His history of silencing those with opposing views or facts directly goes against everything journalism stands for. I have heard from several coaches and players that his modus operandi, I don't even know if I said that correctly, has made them uncomfortable and distrusting of the media. He has also harassed both players and fans in a manner unbecoming of a man who he claims to be held in high regard among his peers. This is simply unacceptable. I am working in full cooperation with all national media organizations to ensure that this behavior is condemned and disciplined. We must not let men like this control the flow of information without consequence. Their monopoly on the written word is dangerous and their ethics unsound. This is especially true in regards to Jeff Goodman. And then it says Sic Semper Tyrannis. Again, don't know what that means. Rob Reinhart. And the reason I'm even bringing this up in the first place is even though Jeff Goodman has always kind of been the guy, the way that this announcement lays things out, Jeff Goodman always wants to be in control of the narrative around, certain teams. He's always kind of loved being the guy that other fan bases hate for whatever reason. He's always acted as if he has certain information before everybody else. And there are times when he does, but like, for example, during the Indiana basketball coaching search, he acted as if he knew 100% who Indiana was going to end up going with. And then when it ended up being somebody else, he wouldn't even walk it back. He would just kind of say he was like, it was the guy I knew it was going to be all along, and totally disregard his previous mention of who it would have been. And I guess it's just his way of kind of always acting as if he is truly in the know, even if he might not be as close to every situation as he thinks he is. But even when you throw all of those things in there, to block people on social media that are simply just challenging you on something you may have said, blocking them. Now, again, I don't know the extent of Rob and Jeff's relationship or anything, or working relationship, I should say. So I don't want to act as if I'm super close to this specific situation. Again, this was, like I said, 10 days ago. This may even be resolved. I haven't done a whole lot of digging into it other than what I saw back when this announcement was made. So maybe I'm wasting my breath on this entire thing, but I did want to talk about it. But either way, guys like Jeff Goodman, and I want to throw Dan Dockich in there as well. And I don't know if he does this anymore, but Dockich used to be the same way, where he would just block people that pissed him off. Back whenever I was a mere child, a teenager, I should say, and being more of a fan, a chaotic fan, I should say, as opposed to where I am now, where I can kind of just take things as they are and it doesn't affect my day the way that it used to. But I remember getting blocked by Dan Dockich as a teenager. I don't know that I'm blocked by him anymore. I don't think I am. I don't even know how that works. I'm not even going to check to see if I am. But the only time, I don't really know if there's a specific reason where it should be okay to block. Now, if you're getting harassed by somebody and you want to block them, that's one thing. But if you're blocking somebody because they're challenging something you said, I don't think that's something that should be really tolerated. So just want to talk about that. And of course, if you want to share your thoughts on anything, whether it be this or something else we've talked about, please share them in the comments. And because I do want to continue to do more interaction with the YouTube comment section once again. And also, I may bring back the hotline too, especially now that we've kind of got, I don't want to say we have a new audience with On3, but there's definitely going to be some new people over the next several months that jump onto the show. And whenever I did the hotline idea back at the beginning of the show, it was utilized a little bit, but I probably jumped on that train a little too soon. But now that we've built a bit of an audience here with the show, I think that's something, especially since we're doing it once a week, we can kind of maybe dedicate an entire segment or a few minutes at the end of each show to go through some calls. So I guess that's another thing I want you guys to weigh in on. If you want me to bring back the In Touch with Indiana Sports hotline, where you can call, I'll give you a number you can call, and instead of leaving a YouTube comment, you can share your thoughts and opinions on one thing or another via that way. Let me know in the comment section if you want to see that return, and we may or may not move forward with that. So I guess with that being said, I've gone through all the things I want to get into today, other than my conversation with Drew Rosenberg on the NBA playoffs. So what we're going to do now is transition into that segment, and then on the other side, we're going to wrap things up, and then we'll do this all again next week. So right now, let's transition into our conversation on the NBA playoffs with one Drew Rosenberg. Joining me once again, it has been a while since we've had anybody on, but it's definitely been a while since we've had Drew Rosenberg of talking about the Hoosiers on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Welcome back, my friend, and I would say happy Mother's Day. You're not a mom, but it's also Mother's Day. So I guess happy Mother's Day to your mom for allowing you to exist.
Yeah, thank you. And to your wife now, with who is a mother now, so her first Mother's Day as well.
Yep. But we've got a lot of stuff to really kind of catch up on. We're going to briefly talk IU basketball. We'll save a lot of that for a later discussion, but you and I are primarily going to talk a lot of NBA playoffs today, since that's kind of what we've done throughout the year in little bits and pieces. But I'll save kind of my thoughts on that for here in just a moment. But real quick, just kind of, since Indiana basketball is really, it may not be a fully finalized roster, but it's definitely a lot more complete than it was, a little over a month ago. I just kind of want to get your brief thoughts on what you make of what Darren DeVries has been able to do. I know we don't really know how all of it's going to come together until we get to next November, but just kind of want to hear your initial reaction or thoughts on what's happened so far.
Yeah, I think you can kind of make a few, assumptions based on how the roster's been built. I think we're at 11 guys, still waiting on the Luke Goody, Anthony Leo waiver situation, which is uncertain. And I think people look at the roster. I think the most obvious thing that's been talked about is, there isn't a true, 7-foot bruiser that Indiana and most Big Ten teams that have. And that's not on the roster right now, and that's caused a lot of concern. But then my kind of counter to that is you look across the roster, and I think 7 of the 11 are above 6'6". You have a lot of length, and you do have size, even if it isn't the true, 7-footer, and you have a lot of versatility. You have guys that can play, 2, 3, 4 positions. just across the board, you look at Lamar Wilkerson. He's a guy who can play probably the 2 and the 3. Tucker DeVries can play the 2, 3, and some small ball 4. Josh Harris can play a little 4 and 5. Reed Bailey can play some 4 and 5. Just across the board, you have versatility and you have shooting too. And that's the other thing with this roster. Tatum Conaway is not the best shooter, but he's a really good passer. And around him, you're going to have Lamar Wilkerson, who is arguably the best three-point shooter in the entire transfer portal. In addition to him, Tucker DeVries, another knockdown shooter. Reed Bailey, there's question marks about his jumper. He, I think, was 40% last year from 3. And so if he goes back, builds off that, it'll be huge for Indiana. But he's a guy who's worked on his jumper a lot. Jason Drake, another shooter. Nick Dorns can shoot the ball. Josiah Miles, the numbers don't show it as much as they do, but if you watch him play, he's another guy who can shoot the basketball. A lot of shooting, a lot of versatility. And it's not a roster we've seen from Indiana maybe ever.
And it's probably really tough at this point in time to really pinpoint like who is going to be the guy. But I do think, at least with some of the discussions I've had with people just in passing, I feel like Lamar Wilkerson is kind of the initial guy that people look at thinking, okay, if anybody's going to be the initial kind of maybe leader of the team, isn't the best usage, but most talented player on the roster is probably the best way to look at him at this point in time, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar Wilkerson throughout his college career, especially last year, high volume and efficient three-point shooter. He's a guy who can score the ball at will, score at a high level. The thing is, you look across the roster, a lot of these guys were the best player, best scorer on their team. Tatum Conaway was the Sunbelt Player of the Year a year ago. Lamar Wilkinson was a leading scorer. Tucker DeVries was one of the leading scorers on his team. Reed Bailey, another guy who led his team in scoring. So a lot of guys across the board who can score the ball. Haven't even talked about Nick Dorn, another guy averaged 15 a game for Elon a season ago. So there is a ton of scoring across the board, but I think Lamar Wilkerson, and I throw Tucker DeVries in that category too, are probably the two guys you look at to be like, hey, these are probably going to be the 2 leading scorers next season. And Tatum Conaway, a guy kind of going under the radar, he's probably not, he'll probably be around that 10-point per game mark if I had to, make a prediction right now in May, which, throw all that stuff out. I mean, a May prediction. But he's a guy who can pass the ball at a high level, one of the best passers in the transfer portal. I haven't even talked about Connor Enright, who's another elite passer. But you look at guys like that, you're like, oh, the shooting is questionable. This isn't an Indiana roster of, a year ago, 2 years ago, where you put a guy like Trey Galloway, who's a very good passer around, non-shooters. There is going to be the spacing. There are the shooters now for these passers that will, it should elevate Indiana's offense. And we should see a more, 21st century modern, offensive style.
We'll have to wait and see, of course, another 6 months or so. And maybe it might even be exactly 6 months from today, depending on when the first game ends up actually being. So looking forward to seeing how things end up meshing together. And if you want to hear more in depth on really your thoughts and Kyler Staley's thoughts and the whole Hoosier.com crew's thoughts on what this roster looks like, check out Talking About the Hoosiers and, of course, all the other wonderful things they've been writing on the website. But this is a place where you get to talk about something that you normally don't get to do on the other portions of the site, Drew, and that's the NBA. And for something about the NBA playoffs this year, you and I were kind of chit-chatting before we got this thing rolling. And as for me, as somebody who usually prefers the college game over the professional game, as I've been watching this year's iteration of the playoffs, I've found myself way more invested, partially because once again, the Pacers are doing really well, but it feels like this is one of the more kind of chaotic sets of the playoffs overall. I mean, you've had the Warriors come back against the Rockets when they were, what were they? They have 3-1 on them or down 3-1. They
were
up
Game 7. Yeah.
Yes, that was a wild thing going on. You've had in the semifinals, you had Pacers win their first 2 games on the road. You had the Thunder go down 0-1. Now are down 2-1, if I'm not mistaken, unless I missed something that happened in between. You've had the Knicks go up 2-0 on the Celtics. There's been so much, and you're a big Celtics guy. I almost forgot about that. There's been a lot of things. It's almost tough to keep up with all of the, I guess you can call it parity going on with the playoffs. I've focused a lot more on what the Pacers have done, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. And I guess it's at the time of this recording tonight. So when the show comes out, we'll already have a result from game 4, and we'll talk kind of a little bit about that here in a little bit. But I do just kind of want to start with, for you, what's been the most enjoyable part of this particular iteration of the playoffs so far?
I love the back and forth, nature of it. Coming into the playoffs, you kind of saw three teams that people, it felt like were above the rest, in the Celtics, Cavs, and Thunder. And a lot of people I think were worried they were going to, walk. It was just going to be a walk until those three are facing each other, and it really hasn't been that at all. The Thunder, they walked through their first round series against Memphis.
Yeah.
Memphis, wasn't bad, but new coach right before the playoffs, had a lot of moving pieces, so it was tough. But Cavs, I think they swept the Heat, and the Heat were not very good. But even, the other games, Celtics, Magic, those are a lot of tough physical games. You had the Pacers and the Bucks, which, people don't like to talk about as much, but that is a rivalry. It's built over the years with Giannis. Giannis does not like Indiana, and Indiana does not. I mean, you had all the Halliburton stuff with Giannis and Halliburton's father, which was really funny to watch as just an outside perspective. But it's the intensity. I mean, people like to talk about how in the NBA, there's no defense. And I always counter with, it's because there's so much gifted offense that's so hard to stop. But in the playoffs, you see the game slow down. The possessions mean more from and every second really matters. And you see these games where teams are grinding it out. And it's, it does not matter what you do on the floor as long as you get a win. Anthony Edwards last night was 13 for 28. But, he played pretty well, got the win. And it's one of those things, like, whatever it takes to get the win. You look at the Celtics Knicks series, the first three games, Celtics were up 20 in the first. Well, they've been up 20 in every single game, and Knicks still found a way to come up 2-0. And it was like, you think the Knicks are like, we played awesome? Not really going down 20, but, you find a way to win. And that's what the beauty is of the playoffs, finding different ways to win.
Well, and throw the Cavs in there. They completely ransacked the Heat 4-0 in their first round. And I'm sure many people, even though they were shorthanded in their first two rounds against the Pacers at home, I mean, those were very hard-fought games and could have gone either way depending on, especially game two. I mean, my gosh. My wife and I were sitting on the couch during game two of Pacers-Cavs, and I had a little bit of wagering going on that one as well. And so just sitting there and seeing everything play out the way that it did, I saw so many people make comparisons to Reggie Miller when talking about what Tyrese Halliburton was able to do in that game two specifically. And I know things didn't go so well for Tyrese specifically and the Pacers in game three, but just I kind of want to hear what you've thought of. I mean, nobody thought, I don't want to say nobody, but most, I'm sure, national experts were not expecting Indiana to be in the position that they're in right now.
I'll be honest, I was a lot higher on Indiana than most, and I still thought the Cavs would win this series in 6-7. I thought, Indiana plays, I think we talked about this in the beginning of the year, Indiana style of play, they play so much faster than other teams that in the playoffs, when the game slows down, Indiana speeds it up, and it's such a hard type of style to, match. And Tyrese Halliburton, I think on this show, I referred to him as an engine in the past, and this was in his early season struggles. He is so efficient. He doesn't turn the ball over, high usage, high assists, but then clutch time, he's not really a scorer. I wouldn't call him, a bona fide scorer. He's not someone who's going to get you 25, 30 in a night. He's going to consistently get good looks for the rest of his team. But when the game matters most, he just has that clutch gene. He has that, that killer mentality end of games. And I saw a stat. I don't know what it's up to now, but at one point this year, he was 10 for 11 on tying or go-ahead threes or go-ahead shots in the final 2 minutes of a game, which I think like the best all time for like final 24 seconds. It's like 35%. He was shooting above 90.
Wow.
There was not enough talk about Tyrese Halliburton as a clutch player. And, he had a really bad game three. And how he bounces back tonight is, it's going to be really interesting to watch, because does he have another performance like that? Or, can he get back and regain control? Because I don't want to call this, a must win for the Pacers, but it feels like it's a can't lose type of game. Like if the Pacers lose this game and it's 2-2 after, that start, and Cleveland takes home court advantage back. And I think the same thing for the Celtics series too. If, the favorites are able to tie it 2-2 and go back home to game 5 2-2, I think it's going to be a rough time for the Pacers and Knicks.
Yeah, I've seen many people, and of course, I'll say this one more time. We won't talk specifically about Game 4 stuff too much, because, again, at the time of this release, we'll already have a result. But I've seen a lot of people mention that they think that the winner of Game 4 here, and you could say the same thing with probably Knicks and Celtics as well, Do you think no matter what, because a lot of people tend to say this type of stuff, and then you get to game 5 and 6 and things can easily turn once again. Would you fully commit into saying that winner of game 4, Pacers Cavs, is going to go on to win the series, even if it gets to a game 7?
It's one of those things I'd have to see how it happens, but yeah,
Exactly.
I lean that way.
That's always the little inkling,
yeah,
because you have to watch the game play out. See, because if the Pacers, and I don't mean to step on your toes again, but if the Pacers lose a close one here in game 4, that could be something that maybe you get into another tight situation in Cleveland, because you already know you've won there twice. So again, don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Like, it's one of those things. There's so much parity in basketball, and it's why, I mean, you talked about college basketball. It's why March Madness is so fun, because on any given game, anything can happen. You look at the Celtics' first 2 games; they had their 2 worst shooting performances of the season back to back. Like, and it wasn't like people saying, "Oh, this is just your worst." It was statistically their worst 3-point shooting percentages of their last, 90 games. It was 89 and 90, and they happen to have been back to back in the same series, and you're now down 2-0. And there's a lot of people panicking. It's like, well, if you just get back to the norm, you're going to be fine. And we saw game 3, Celtics a lot closer to the norm, and they win comfortably. So it's one of those things. The Cavs really struggled to shoot the ball in game 1. Game 2, it's weird. You look at the, Pacers, Cavs, neither of them really have that, championship experience, but Pacers clearly more. In close games, I trust the Pacers more than the Cavs at this point. I mean, they went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, and there's always this talk in the NBA. You have to, suffer the brutal losses. You have to get over the hump and finally climb it. You look at the champions. It's never it's rarely a team just comes out of nowhere and wins the title. Thunder last year had some close losses. Pacers got to the Eastern Conference Finals, lost 3 games where they really should have or could have beaten the Celtics. And even going back to the Celtics last year, 2022, they lost a bunch of close games at the end to Golden State in the finals. And it's that championship DNA. And the Pacers, that ability to close out tight games, it's what makes them so dangerous, because if they just need to hang around long enough to get into those situations.
So if the Pacers do find a way to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals, no matter if it's the Knicks or the Celtics, I think most people would say they have a much better shot of making the finals against the Knicks as opposed to the Celtics. But let's just throw both scenarios out there. If they're playing the Knicks, do you like their chances? And if they're playing the Celtics, do you like their chances? I would assume you don't if it's the Celtics, but I'm curious if you have any specific thoughts on if either matchup were to eventually play out that way.
As a Celtics guy, the Pacers are like one of those teams. They scare me. It's just the play style, the speed. It's, you have to score to beat them. It's not like you can't just grind it out against them because they're going to play so fast. I still think the Celtics, would win the series. I think it'd be a lot closer, probably Celtics in 6 rather than 4, even though that was maybe the closest 4-game sweep I've ever seen in my life. But if they played the Knicks, I saved this for last, I would lean the Knicks, or I would lean the Pacers. I would lean the Pacers in 7, and it's a very close series. It's, Brunson won Clutch Player of the Year, him and Halliburton, how, who prevails in those clutch time scenarios. And the guy we're really not talking about, but has been really good in the playoffs, Siakam. He has championship DNA. I saw him do an interview talking about, all the experience of the other guys. I was like, dude, you've won a chip. Like, what are we talking about? Of the guys with championship experience, so you're the guy.
And weirdly enough, too, and I'm going back to game 2 for a second, he was kind of the opposite of clutch. Just in that specific scenario, he was missing a couple of free throws. He kind of was a little lackluster and kind of gave the Cavs some life and really almost confidence that they were going to win the entire thing, or that specific game. But other than that, though, Siakam has been one of the more reliable pieces for the Pacers. I do think if you can get consistent nights out of both him and Tyrese Halliburton moving forward, I don't think there's any reason to believe that, depending on who's your third guy helping out, whether it's a Miles Turner or Ben Mathurin, whoever it could be, if you can get that third piece to kind of rotate in, whoever it might be, I think that's a pretty good recipe for finding wins against the Cavs and whoever you may end up going against moving forward if they advance that far.
Yeah, we should bring up Aaron Nesmith because he has been playing some incredible basketball in the playoffs. He's a guy, you look at him and he's like, this guy is made for the playoffs, just the energy, the effort on the defensive end. And then when he's knocking down shots, he's such a huge piece. I saw something today, him talking about it. When the Celtics traded him to Indy for Malcolm Brogdon a few years ago, Bleacher Report, I believe it was, put out like a graphic, was like pretty much the Celtics got Brogdon for nothing. And Neesmith, he talked about it pretty recently, was like, I saw that, I saved that, I burned that into my memory, and it's motivation for him. And you look at a guy right now, I think he's averaging 15 and 6 in the playoffs. He's shooting about 50% from three. The guy, I mean, he was drafted to be what he is doing right now. And a lot of people, Celtics fans especially, were like, oh, he's not living up to the hype. And India's done a heck of a job developing him into a really good 3-and-D player.
I feel like I had one more thing I wanted to. Oh, this is kind of, it's still NBA playoffs, but it's kind of something it's a talking point I've had with a couple different people, and this is really just about the NBA in general. Mm-hmm. And if this is a stupid question, we don't have to spend any time on it, but it's something I do want to throw out there. But I feel like, and I know I'm not the only person, but maybe this just makes me ignorant, but I feel like coaches in the NBA are some of the most, I hate to say unnecessary, but I feel like they're the least talked about sets of head coaches at any level of basketball, football, whatever it may be, because it's so much about, the players in the NBA. You know what I mean? And so how much of an impact do you think Rick Carlisle has on any of this? Or is this all about Tyrese Halliburton? And it doesn't even have to just be Rick Carlisle. It could be any of the NBA coaches, because I'll be sitting there talking with somebody as I'm watching these games saying, what are they even doing? Like how much of a, it almost feels like they're just there to kind of give advice every now and again for specific things, as opposed to doing the actual coaching. Maybe this comment makes me sound like a complete idiot, but I did want to at least bring it up because I've thought about it multiple times.
It's a fair comment, and you're not the only person to have that opinion. I've talked to a lot of people. I tend to go the exact opposite way, and I've had the opposite talking point, so this kind of sets me up perfect. I think NBA coaches, it's like one of the, it's an unbelievable job. There's only 30 people who get to be an NBA coach at any given time. But it's also one of those jobs. If you win, you get no credit. If you lose, you get all the blame. You look at Joe Mazzulla and the Celtics. When the Celtics, they went down 3-0 to the Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. Mazzulla's first year, he took over like a week before the season started because of, the Ime Udoka stuff. And if Tatum doesn't roll his ankle, maybe the Celtics come back from down 3-0 and go to the championship. Who knows? People were calling for Mazzulla's head that year. And then the next year, what does he do? Have one of the most historic years ever, win a title. And it's all Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday. He's not getting the credit. And it's really funny to me because you can see how a good coach can unlock a team. What did the Cavs really do this offseason? Like, what changes did they make other than hiring Kenny Atkinson? And he's turned them into, I think they had the second best record in the league. Then look at the Pistons. Cade Cunningham obviously took a step, and those guys took a step. But they didn't really add any key, I guess Tobias Harris, but it wasn't like they're adding a superstar that would get them, a 30-win improvement. And you see it in the playoffs a lot too. It's the in-game adjustments. In the playoffs, it's weird because you're playing the same team over and over again, so you know that what they're trying to do. You know exactly who they're going to. But it's finding the little wrinkles, stopping a run, calling a timeout at the right time. In the ATOs is kind of the other place you'll notice it. When a coach calls a timeout, watching what they're, the first offensive possession out of that timeout and how it goes, it's always kind of a good sign of how a coach is doing. Because if a team, out of a timeout is when a team should be generating their best looks on offense, because you have the second to say, hey, they're on a run here, let's stop it and let's get into a good offensive set. And that's, the whole thing with coaching. And it's really funny to me because you just, they're never going to get the credit because it's a players' league. In college, it's the complete opposite. It's starting to flip a little bit, but, no one's ever going to give Steve Kerr, Phil Jackson more credit than the Steph Curry, Michael Jordan. And it's just the way.
Well, too, I remember too, like Rick Carlisle after that second game, he just kind of said we got lucky. And I guess there's a lot of things that had to go right for the Pacers to be able to pull off, eventually get to that game-winning shot in Game 2. But it just, and I guess when you're a coach, you're going to be humble regardless. Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like if you're the coach, you would have said something more than just, we got lucky. And I guess. Maybe it is fun to say something like that every now and again. I don't necessarily follow everything that Rick Carlisle says on a game-to-game basis. I just thought it was interesting the way that he kind of, I don't want to say handled it, but, presented himself after that situation. But
if you ever
either way.
If you ever want to see something funny, just go through Joe Mazzulla's quotes. I don't know if you've ever done this. He had a banger yesterday. It was one of my favorites. He talked about like being in a dark place after game 2, the last 72 hours, and he said, "You just got to tap into your darkness." Talking about the Celtics mentality going into game 3. I think before the season, he talked about people. He was like, "I want the red dot in my right between the eyes so I can see him coming about defending the championship." Like Joe Mazzulla is a Celtics fan. I love him. He's a psychopath in the best way.
You say it sounds kind of Kurt Signetti-ish, but not the same. The same in that they're saying off the wall stuff, but it's a different type of off the wall. It sounds like.
I mean, Mazzulla's just and people think it's a bit, which is the funniest thing about it, because they're like, "Oh, this guy's just doing it for show." And then you realize he's just constantly doing it. So I'm sure there's YouTube videos of Joe Mazzulla best moments. I highly recommend anyone watching them because they are really funny to watch.
Last thing. So next time you and I will check in, I'll try to make it around once probably the finals start. Or maybe if the Pacers make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, maybe we'll catch up then too. But if you were predicting how things play out to the finals, who do you see coming through on both sides?
I'm gonna stick with what I've said since really December. I'm sticking with Celtics Thunder. Once we get there, then I'll probably make the prediction of who's gonna win. I just think out west, I know the Nuggets are up 2-1 right now. I think that Thunder team though, they will figure it out. They're too good not to.
And same on the situation, do you think winner game 4 takes that, or do you think if Nuggets go up 3-1, you think they still have a shot?
If Nuggets go up 3-1, my prediction might be dead in the water. I'll say that. But
and again, that game will also be taken care of before this episode releases.
It's hard. It's it's Jokic. Jokic is the best basketball player on the planet, and I think it's a gap too. It's not like he's you could argue. I think it's definitively. So if the Nuggets go up 3-1, I don't see the Thunder beating them 3 times in a row with Jokic. So I guess winner of that series, but. The NBA, it's usually you have a pretty good grasp of who's coming out. The last few years, it's been kind of, a lot more hectic, which has been awesome for the league. And that Pacers-Cavs series, again, I said I think whoever wins this game on Sunday night takes the series. So there's a lot of good basketball to be watched. And even if the Pacers go up 3-1 or the Nuggets go up 3-1, those series aren't over. Even if I think, one way it's going to go one way, it's not over. We see it all the time. 3-1 leads can just dissipate like that. All it takes is one guy to get hot, one injury, one small thing.
Drew, I appreciate your time. It's been, again, thank you for coming on. It's been a while. We'll definitely check in again soon. Anything coming up for you on thehoosier.com you want to promote before I let you go?
Not really. We have a bunch of stuff. IU football right now, some good stories about that, and then a bunch of recruiting stuff. I know Kyler had some interviews. He interviewed Jason Gardner, a 4-star prospect, about his, his recruitment, AAU season, all that stuff. So that's all on the Hoosier on 3 YouTube. And talk about the Hoosiers coming out every week, every other week. And we're going to have some some really cool guests come on the show this summer. So tune in for that.
Good stuff. Talk about the Hoosiers with him, Kyler Staley. Zach Browning, I believe, has been a part of it too. I need to get him on the show. I haven't chatted with him just yet, but check that out. Check this out, of course. And we'll do this again sometime, Drew. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right. I appreciate Drew. As always, it's been a while since we've had him on the show, and we'll definitely continue to follow along with everything going on with the Pacers. And if they make the Eastern Conference Finals, we'll talk to Drew once again. And either way, when we get to the NBA Finals, when we get to the final 2 teams, we'll talk with Drew there as well and get his thoughts on how he thinks things will play out. Because he, as opposed to myself, is way more in tune with the NBA than I am. And although I have been following along with the playoffs more so than I have in some previous seasons, he's definitely somebody who is more, again, close to everything when it comes to each of the teams and not just the Indiana Pacers, of course. So we'll definitely keep up with all of that. But all right, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's show. I want to remind you one more time to subscribe, of course, to the Hoosier on 3 on YouTube. Hit that notifications bell if you enjoyed what you heard today. and you'll be notified when any other episode, along with some of our other shows, talking about the Hoosiers and Hoosier Tailgate with Shannon Griffith. I'd love to get him back on the show. It's been a very, very long time since I've talked with Shannon, but I'm looking forward to seeing what he's going to bring to the table with his show. I checked out some of it the other day, and he's got very high production value to what he's got going on. So if you want some more, especially Indiana football specific things, check out Hoosier Tailgate. And what else? Subscribe, of course. We talked about what's going on with the Hoosier.com. Right now, you can sign up and only have to pay for $1. You only have to pay $1 for the first month, and then you get 50% off for the rest of the year. And of course, as we get into football season here in just a few months, you're going to want to be the first person to know about all of the different things, especially the exclusive things that the Hoosier.com is able to get before anybody else. If you want to be somebody who is up to date, you want to be the most in-tune fan, in-touch fan, maybe I'll say, for the cliche of the show, then you want to subscribe to the Hoosier.com. Right now, you can join for just $1 and then get 50% off for the rest of the athletic calendar and beyond for a whole 12 months. So be sure to do that if you haven't already. And also, we're very close to 1,000 subscribers here on YouTube. I know I already said subscribe on YouTube, but if you haven't, if you're checking this show out for the first time, if you enjoy it, you like some of our other shows, hit that subscribe button. Help us get to 1K. We would very much appreciate each and every one of you who do so. Until next week, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by thehoosier.com.